Hello and welcome back to another datasheet review. Today's video is near and dear to my heart because I am a competitive orc player and 10th edition has not been very kind to us. But this might all change today because we are looking at a new datasheet release in the form of Wazzdakka Gutsmek. And in this video we are going to look at the datasheet, its capabilities, what does it do for the current orc army, as well as which detachments that this guy wants to go in, and also some potential combos. And overall we are going to tackle the question, is this guy absolutely busted, or is he just good, or is he even not that good at all? My name is Damien Cooper and welcome to another episode of High Stakes 40k, where we are all in on Warhammer. First things first, let's look at the datasheet and quickly go over what this new guy can do. Wazzdakka is sitting on his bike called Big Reva, and he has a stat line of what looks like an orc truck with a better save and a 4-up invul, which is pretty amazing. I would consider him more of a hybrid between a buggy and a bike, because he's also mounted as well as vehicle, but we will get into this later. So overall, I assume that this will be on a chunky base, probably somewhere between a bike base and that of a Defkiller Wartrike. I hope it's not as big as a Defkiller Wartrike because this thing is enormous, but we'll have to see. Let's look at the overall stat line. This guy moves 14 inches, which I believe is one of the fastest, if not the fastest unit in the entire Orc Codex, so this I'm already happy about. Wazzdakka features a toughness characteristic of 8, and that makes me really hopeful for our upcoming datasheet releases as well as the new codex, because as of right now, Gazgul Mek Uruk Thraka, the biggest orc in the universe, is only toughness 6. A Defkiller Wartrike is also only toughness 6, and this is where I always like to look at Wazzdakka more as a hybrid between a buggy as well as a bike, but I'm really happy that we get a little bump in toughness here. He also features a 3-up save, which is also kind of rare for orcs, vehicles, bikes, whatever you want to call it. And he also has a 4-up invul, and this makes him, I think, the 3rd unit in the entire codex that does have a 4-up invul, if we don't count the Big Mech and Mega Armor if he's leading. But I think there's only 3 units in the entire codex that does feature a 4-up invul. Gazgul, Mosrok, and now Wazzdakka Gutsmek. He also has 10 wounds, which is great because this is quite chunky to through, especially with the T8 and the 3-up 4-up, so 10 wounds, good. 6-up leadership, as you would expect from an epic hero, and he is OC3. Maybe I wish he was a little bit more OC, like a Ballistus Dreadnought at OC4, but I'm happy with OC3 and that's totally fine. Now let's quickly brush over his weapon profiles, because they also make me kinda happy and this is not what I expected. Wazzdakka Gutsmek has 2 different range profiles. Number 1 is a 12-inch gun that hits on 2s with precision built in and is strength 10 AP 2 3 damage. And here we can see that this is basically just his melee attack that he just yeets out like Inspector Gadget to just precision out a character. And this is also why he hits on 2s, because he also hits on 2s in melee, which we go over later. So this is basically just his melee fist throwing at people. His second gun is the Psycho Gatler, and that actually surprised me, because it is a 12-shot gun at 24-inch range that is hitting on 4s, strength 6, AP 2 damage. And what makes me really happy is that both of these range weapons have assault. There's actually surprisingly little assault in the current 10th edition Orc Codex, which is really weird because orcs want to run and just duck at the same time, especially if you combine this with our army rule where everything gets advanced and charged, but then we can't shoot any of our guns. Anyway, I'm happy that both of these guns have assault. The Psycho Gatler also has sustained built in, which is actually pretty nice. The one thing that really stands out here is that he is hitting on 4s. You could think that it's the little mech that is actually hitting on 4s and he is kind of gunning with the big Gatling gun, and then it would make sense because Grots hit on 4s naturally, whereas all orcs hit on 5s. But here it might also be a foreshadow for 11th edition, which makes me again really hopeful. We already know that cover will change in 11th edition and that it is not bettering your armor save, but it is actually worsening the opponent's ballistic skill. And if all of our orcs are hitting on 5s naturally, and then if they hit something in cover they actually only hit on 6s, then shooting in 11th edition for our orcs would be very sad. So maybe this is just a hint that our ballistic skill will go to 4 to kind of tackle the cover rules, but we will see. Now let's talk about the melee weapon. The little grot that I already mentioned, called Fix It, has its own wrench, so it's an extra attack, strength 3 at AP 0, 1 damage, which is hilarious and, well, just another dice you have to roll. But then let's talk about the main character energy we have here, and that is the Grabber Dragger, and that is 6 attacks at weapon skill 2, strength 10 with lance, AP 2, damage 3. And this is quite honestly a lot more than I expected. We don't get AP 3, we only have AP 2, which is kind of notorious for the current state of orcs, but we do get damage 3, and this is super valuable. Starting at strength 10 with lance also means that on the war turn, when we go to strength 11, we're actually wounding a lot of big vehicles like the new defilers or a knight on 3s, which is pretty amazing. I also love that we're hitting on 2s naturally, but again, it's an epic hero, so that was to be expected. And then we also have additional attacks from our bike itself, because our exhaust also wants to get into the fight, and here we have 6 extra attacks at strength 5, AP 1, 1. And that is also pretty cool, also hitting on 2s, so we can't really get bogged down by a couple of guardsmen, for example, because we can just have the volume to actually just fight our way through it. Hilariously, if you're looking at it, Wazzdakka Gutsmek, which is basically a one model unit, has a total of 26 attacks, going up to 27 on the Wa. 13 in range and then 13 or 14 in melee, which is quite hilarious. Before we look at the datasheet ability, let's look at some of the overall abilities and keywords. The core abilities feature a deadly demise of D3, which is kind of funny, and it is a big bike, I guess. Next to it, we have the Deep Strike ability, and this is super cool. I guess that this bike is so fast and teleports around so that we do get Deep Strike, and this will come in very handy later when we talk about the other abilities. And then the last core ability is the Lone Operative ability, and this again is super powerful, and this is the second unit in the entire codex that features the Lone Op ability if you don't count the little mech when it's near a vehicle. So we do have a Lone Op, which means we can usually deploy him on the line and then yeet forward at our opponent, which is super cool. He can also hold some objectives late game where the opponent is still too far away on the other side of the battlefield, so Lone Op, super strong on a lot of maps. Then we go to our keywords, and here gets interesting, because it features the mounted as well as the vehicle keyword, and I haven't seen any other unit in the game that has mounted as well as vehicle, and this has some implications on how this unit will play on the battlefield. There are some minor buffs to it, because being mounted as well as a vehicle means we can do something like a tank shock, and we can also shoot our guns in combat, and this can be situationally pretty good. It also does have a lot of downsides though. Since we do have the vehicle keyword, we are vulnerable to all anti-vehicle guns or melee attacks in the game, as well as that we can't heroic with it. It also excludes us from a lot of our stratagems, which is kind of sad, but I will get into this a little later in the video. The vehicle keyword might also mean that we have to pay 2 inches for pivot, which is very sad, because then we kind of just go down to 12 inch of movement again, but again we will have to see on which kind of base he actually comes and if that is actually true. He does have the Speed Freaks keyword, which is quite obvious, and that makes him slot in very nicely into our Cult of Speed detachment, but again I will talk about detachments later. He is an epic hero and he does have the smoke keyword, and this is super interesting because first of all, almost none of our vehicles have the smoke keyword, so this is pretty cool to increase his durability and give him stealth as well as cover, and it could also be huge for 11th edition, but we don't know if our core stratagems will stay the same or if they will change. But if they do stay the same, this is basically -2 to hit, because stealth gives him -1 to hit and cover would give the opponent -1 of their ballistic skills, so that could make him a lot more durable. Well, other than that, he's just a character and his name is Wazzdakka Gutsmek. But now let's get to the star of the show, and that is the datasheet abilities. Number 1 is called Fixit der Grot, and this is the little Gretchen that we have on the bike, and well, as his name suggests, he will fix our bike. In our command phase, he can heal us up to D3, and that is pretty cool because it might have you get around battle shocks before you start scoring, etc, and it just increases your durability a little bit. Our second datasheet ability, the Throttle Rocket Shocker Engine, is where this datasheet gets crazy. In our command phase, we can pick one of 3 abilities, like Gulliman or Abaddon or all the other Primarchs in the game. And all of the 3 abilities are super powerful. The first ability is called Turbo Engine, and it lets our biker advance and charge or fall back and charge. And that is super great because we have very little access to advance and charge outside of our army rule, and this just makes him so much faster. Fallback and charge is also amazing, so if we do get stuck in but we don't manage to actually kill our opponent, we can then choose to pick this in our command phase, fall back and charge again. The next ability we can choose from is the Shock Attack Engine, and that lets us teleport around the battlefield. In our command phase, we can pick Wazzdakka up and put him in strategic reserves. And the timing of this is super powerful because we can do this in our command phase. So we can also deep strike him back in the same phase, which basically means we can just teleport him around. Kind of like Boss Nikrot, but better because it's not once per game and we can do so every single turn. We also don't have to put him right back, and we can just leave him in strategic reserves and then rapid ingress him on our opponent's turn. And that has some really powerful implications. Let's say we go first and we pick this ability. So in our first command phase, we just pick him up and we leave him in strategic reserves. Now our opponent's first turn comes around, and now we can actually rapid ingress him turn 1, and that is quite crazy. Since Wazzdakka started on the battlefield, it allows us to actually make use of the Deep Strike turn 1 rule because we do have the Deep Strike keyword. And this synergizes amazingly with the Lone Operative ability, because what we can do is, after we've seen where all of our opponent's movement ends, we can just take Wazzdakka and just put him right in the open 12 inches away from all of our opponents. Now we can't get shot, we can't get charged, and then when it's our turn 2, we can call the war, and then we can pick our third ability that I will just talk about right now. The second ability is called the Pulse Jet. It lets us do 2 things. Number 1, when we advance, we just auto advance 6 inches. We're not throwing it in advance, we're just yeeting it up 6 inches forward. And the second part of this ability is that we can move through terrain features as well as opponents' models. So we basically get the fly keyword and we can go through walls and terrain. This is absolutely amazing because it means that our Wazzdakka Gutsmek now goes 20 inches, ignoring models and terrain features. Notably, unless you're in a detachment that has the ability to give him advance and charge any other way, this is a once per game ability if we want to declare a charge after we actually yeeted him up 20 inches. But like I already mentioned, if we go first, we can rapid ingress him 12 inches away from our opponents, so they can't shoot us, they can't do anything to us. And then when it's our turn 2, we call the war, we put this ability on him, and then we can just go straight 20 inches towards our opponent's home marker or towards their valuable targets, ignoring all of their screens and terrain features, and just shoot and charge. And having this threat is super powerful because now our opponent has to play around this at every single turn. So overall, this is a really powerful datasheet with really cool abilities. It's durable, it's fast, and it does have a decent melee as well as ranged output. So now let's talk a little bit about what I think this character will be priced or should be priced at, because I have seen everything from 120 points to he needs to be at least 200 points, otherwise he is absolutely busted. And I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I would compare him roughly around what the Necrosaur was on release, and I think it was 165 points. Also comparing him to our current epic heroes that kind of do the same thing, which would be a Mossrock, who is priced at 145 points. and sees absolutely no play at all because he is too expensive. I would expect him to be around 145 to 165 points, and I think this would be totally fair. I don't think that he is so busted that this would be absolutely undercosted. Like Twin Lands, for example, they were just way too good at 165 points when they came out. But I think the 145 to 165 range is fair, and he will still be an auto include in all of our lists, but not necessarily because he is so busted, but more of because we don't really have anything like it, and most of our data sheets are not that good right now. But now let's dive a little bit deeper and talk about what detachments you want to put him in. Number one is the absolute obvious one, and this is also the one where he will feel at home the most. And that is the current Call of Speed detachment, because in this detachment he will be able to always advance and charge, always advance and shoot, always fall back and charge, and always fall back and shoot. So now the maneuver that I talked about earlier doesn't only work once per game in our war turn, but it works every turn. We can basically just use Pulse Jet every single command phase and have him move 20 inches, going through models and terrain features, and then shooting and charging. One thing to note here is that he doesn't have a leader ability on his datasheet. So currently he's not able to lead anything, and he's just basically a solo character. The way that his Pulse Jet ability is worded though, where it says models in this unit, might make me believe that maybe in an upcoming detachment or in 11th edition, he will be able to lead them through a detachment rule, for example. Because you also get a glint at a new detachment that is another Speed Freaks attachment, where bikers will be able to go 24 inches, and bikers will also be battle line, not only in the new detachment, but because this is his other datasheet ability, because whenever he is your warlord, war bikers have the battle line keyword. As of right now, that doesn't really do anything other than the fact that you can take 36 of them, whereas right now you can only take 18. I'm not sure how good this will be, because currently you only see 18 maximum in all of the lists, but with this new detachment coming up where he may or may not be able to lead war bikers, and you can take 36 of them, and they can go 24 inches forward in a straight line, this might be really interesting. Aside from just being able to always advance and charge and always fall back and charge, etc., he also has the best stratagem support. In this attachment, he can dish out battle shocks at -1, he can have a 6-inch reactive move, we can buff his guns by giving them either Assault 2 or critical hits on 5s and lethals, and here this is super cool because his gun already has sustain. So if we pick the Wazzdakka or whatever it's called stratagem, then not only does his guns gain lethal, but they also gain critical hits on 5s. And that isn't exclusive to the lethal ability, and it also works with the already sustained that the gun has. So now for 1 CP we do have sustained as well as lethal, crits on 5s, hitting on 4s, which is a lot of Dakka actually. So in Speed Freaks, I really do like him. There are a lot of scenarios where we can just use him as a beat stick, run him up, try to battle shock our opponent at -1 so they can't fight on death, they can't armor of contempt or use any other defensive buffs, and then we can even buff his shooting or even his melee and just attack straight on without having to worry about our opponent just being too defensive. Another reason I like him in Speed Freaks, because he does add some damage and he just works well with what the army wants to do. And the current Speed Freak lists in Cult of Speed have very little to absolutely no damage. It's basically just an auto C, board control, jail your opponent kind of army, and that just adds to it. Especially the fact that he can go through models and terrain features just lets him go all the way deep into your opponent's deployment zone, where Cult of Speed actually wants to be all game long. Another detachment he might also be at home in is the new Freebooter Crew detachment. I haven't played it myself, but since they made the change to the detachment rule that you can now pick your looted objective in the command phase, this also might be interesting because you also have a 1 CP called the War stratagem in there. So you can just put him on that objective, call this objective your looted one, and then just put him in the war for 1 CP. So he does get to advance and charge, auto advance 6, and go through enemy models every turn if you really want to. and he starts on an objective. You can also buff him with sustained hits and reroll wounds on those objectives, so there is some synergy in there and you can use stratagems on here. Hilariously enough, you can also give his weapons blast, which means you can give his precision weapon blast. So if you get multiple shots in a unit of 10 that has a leader, you are very likely to get multiple shots onto your opponent's character, and that could actually be quite powerful. So here I definitely think he has a home. How competitive this detachment is overall, I'm not sure. I haven't had the time to test it yet because I am preparing for a really big tournament series that is starting tomorrow and I didn't have the time to experiment with anything new. Another detachment I really like him in, and this is not the most obvious one, is Green Tide. Green Tide is just a slow-moving army that wants to overwhelm your opponent with bodies, but one thing it definitely lacks is speed. Wazzdakka could add this speed, because by going through models and terrain features and being that fast, he actually brings another threat to the army that Green Tide only has in form of the Weird Boy. But the Weird Boy is super unreliable because you need to do the jump on a 2+ and then you need to roll your 7-inch charge. It's actually an 8-inch charge, it is rerollable, but overall it's not reliable. And here I feel like Wazzdakka can just replace the Weird Boy unit and just makes it so much more reliable with even more damage. And since I suspect that he will be roughly around the points cost of a unit of 10 boys as well as the Weird Boy, that would just slot in perfectly. It also adds to the fact that now your opponent has to fight at two fronts. Usually Green Tide is just running at you and they're all up in your front line, but now you might have a threat that is behind your enemy and then another one that is in front of enemy, so they need to split their forces and can't fully concentrate of just tackling the tide in front of them. Lastly, he also feels very good in Warhorde just as a standalone character. He does have some stratagem support where we can just have him crit on 5s with all of his attacks for 1 CP. Other than that, there's not a lot of stratagem support. We can't Artist Nails him because he does have the vehicle keyword. We can't use Eerie Go on him because that's only for infantry. Funnily enough, we can Careen him, which might be very funny but not really good for only D3 damage. But overall, I just like him in Warhorde. It just gives another level of threat, and if you combine this with the Gusgul plus Big Mac plus 20 boys unit, we now have 2 units that ignore terrain features as well as enemy models, so that adds to the threat range and our opponent has to play around it. I think depending on the price point, he will still be an auto-include in almost all of the other lists, but he doesn't really have a lot of synergy. Like in Dreadmob, he doesn't have the mech keyword, although he's called Gutsmek, so he doesn't really do much for the army there. He has no detachment or stratagem support. Same is true for the Big Hunt, he doesn't have any detachment or stratagem support, but maybe he slots in nicely to a Alpha Strike J list there with the scout enhancement on the Squighawks and then him being able to just rapid ingress and move up. But overall, in most detachments, he doesn't have any support, neither from the detachment nor from the stratagems. Bully Boys would be pretty cool for him if he had the Warboss keyword, but he doesn't. So again, overall, it's just his datasheet with very little to no support in any of our detachments. In Tactical Brigade, he has some synergy because he does have the mounted keyword, so we can order him. Unfortunately, he can't order himself or anything else because he doesn't have the Warboss keyword, but you could make him stealth or give him reroll charges or +1 strength, whereas I feel that's not really worth it because he can give himself stealth and cover with the smoke keyword. He can also reroll charges for 1 CP. And the +1 strength could be cool breakpoints where you get him to strength 12 on the Wa, so he would be wounding big knights and defilers on 2s. But overall, I don't feel like it's worth it just to take him for this detachment. So now let's look at how good he really is and how he elevates our Orc army. One thing to note here is that he doesn't have any synergies with the army. He doesn't buff anything. He's just a really good datasheet that does his own thing. He doesn't have any aura abilities, or he doesn't really do anything for the army, and he can't lead either. So this way, I don't feel like he is fundamentally changing how Orcs play now because he isn't buffing anything. Like for example, when the Necrosaur character came out for Necrons, he had synergy with the entire army. He gave everything around him sustained. He was also able to have a fights first character that can then heroic and protect the Catan and other assets, as well as giving them a 5-up feel no pain against mortal wounds. So he was really buffing the entire army. I also feel he doesn't solve any issues the army has, because in my opinion, as a competitive orc player who has brought orcs to almost all of the tournaments I played in 10th edition, all the way up to the recent Pyra Cup where we were playing the best players in the entire world, facing off against Team USA as well as Team France, Team Poland, etc, etc. I just felt like orcs aren't up to the standard. They're a little bit too honest, they got power crept out of the edition, and they just can't compete with the top of the meta armies. And I'm not really sure that Wazzdakka Gutsmek is changing any of this, because he can't kill a Custodes Land Raider, he's not really good into Victrix, he doesn't really do anything into Tau that well. So all of our predators are not getting that much easier just because of him. It will add another layer of threat. We do have some funky abilities. Our opponent has to play around him. And in theory, he's great because he is kind of Wa agnostic, because he does have the ability to advance in charge and fall back in charge. He can also teleport around. He has a lone up ability, and overall his datasheet is so good that he doesn't need the Wa to actually function. He also has a 4-up invul always, so the defensive buffs from the Wa also don't really bother him. So this is really good and something we are lacking in orcs, something that is Wa agnostic. However, I still don't see how this fundamentally changes the way that the army plays. If you take him in Warhorde, he will make your Warhorde list better. So on our Wa turn, if we rapid ingressed him turn 1 or just positioned him and staged him, we now have another unit that can reliably hit our opponent, ignoring models, ignoring terrain features. But we also have to take out about 160, 170, 180 points for it. So that is an entire unit of beast snaggers with a beast boss, for example. So it's not like we just add him onto our army, we just have to replace something that is then not hitting our opponent. If we use him more as an early skirmisher or a late game skirmisher, then again we are losing a bit of the punch on our Wa turn because we need to replace something in our army. Another thing, because I keep hearing this from other people who don't play orcs, is how busted and how broken he is, and he's better than the Demon Prince and Emperor's Children, etc, etc. And I don't want to downplay his abilities, but orcs don't work the way other armies do, and this is causing a problem sometimes. If I had Wazzdakka Gutsmek to be able to just threaten your opponent's natural expansion and then yeet him out, kill 5 Space Marines on there, now our opponent has to commit something decent to actually chew through this defensive profile, and then I can just punish him. If I were to play Chaos Knights, I can just shoot whatever comes out with my big knights. But in Orcs we don't really have that. So a lot of the times, if I do this and I use them for early trading, I can't really punish my opponent. Yeah, maybe they do have to come closer to us, but that still requires my entire other army to stage in a good position. So this is the same problem that we always have with, let's say, Warhorde, for example. And he doesn't really change that. He is, however, a great piece for after the Wa turn. If he survives, he can fall back and charge another thing, and he is super fast, which again, our army isn't after the Wa has been called. But in my experience, that means we can't commit him until after the Wa turn, because if we do commit him on the Wa turn, it's always either we did enough damage and then we win the game anyway, or we didn't do enough and then we mostly get tabled. And at the end of the day, he is just a truck with a 4-up invul, so he will die after our clapback after the Wa turn, so that doesn't really change. And if we don't commit him on the Wa turn, we might not have enough damage on the Wa turn, and I feel like we're already kind of light on damage compared to the power crept edition that we're currently in, so we need every punch that we can get. So this is all speaking for Warhorde. So overall, he's not elevating the army to another level and just getting us 2 tiers up. So my current thoughts is, with everything that we know so far in 10th edition, with all the detachment and rules that we have available right now, he will make every single orc list better. There is no doubt about it. If he isn't completely overpriced, he will probably be an auto-include in most, if not all of our orc lists, and he will make all of them better. I don't think he will make them very good though. It's not like the top players in the world, if they had to prepare for a really big important tournament, they will just bring out their orcs just because of him. They will probably still stick to one of the top meta armies and disregard orcs until 11th edition. So overall, I'm really happy that we got him. I'm really excited for him in 11th edition. I'm really excited for the new detachments because they might change everything, and I'm currently painting all of my war bikers to be ready for it. But currently, as of right now, I don't think that he is so busted that he will just single-handedly change how orcs play. So now up to you guys. What do you think? How good is Wazzdakka Gutsmek really? How do you want to use him in the current 10th edition? And what are you looking forward to? And which detachment do you want to put him in? As always, I like to thank all of my Patreon and YouTube members that stick with me. And if you do want to join the cause, then there's a link down in the description below. And you can pledge your loyalty to the great Wa that we will shout in the very near future, in 10th edition and all the way beyond 11th edition. And if you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up because it really helps the channel grow. Subscribe for more, and I hope to see you on the next video on High Stakes 40k, where we are all in on Warhammer.